the big nerf hammer finally hit the Visions of Eternity specs. But this is not the only thing that we get with this patch. Of course, we get Wintersday and we also get some buffs to underperforming specs. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm Mesmer, and as usual, special thanks to all my dear supporters that helped me keep the lights on. Now, without much further ado, let's jump straight in. Of course, if you're only interested in a specific section, so if you're only interested in Guardian, be sure to use the timestamps below to skip to the corresponding section. With that much said, let's start with the general notes. So we get the annual achievement, we get of course new skins, we get new decorations, we get just some bug fixes in general. Nothing crazy big, I would say here, as far as I can tell. Wintersday is a very nice festival, and of course it is a very, very good time to farm a lot of karma. So guide about that as well as the normal guide about the whole festival coming very soon. So be sure to have subscribed for that. But now let's continue with the other general changes. We have some UI changes, nothing crazy, just some fixes. You have now an icon that you can see with commander icon and subgroup. That is quite nice in this squad, but nothing crazy. So yeah, no big changes, as well as here some open world and some item changes. I will go over it very quickly because there is, in my opinion, nothing that is like game changing. Yeah, most of the things here are like just some small fixes and changes that should have been maybe done in the first place already. Some personal story changes, and now we get to the big stuff. That's why we are all here. The profession skill changes. This update focuses on reducing the effectiveness of the overperforming specializations while we work on the next regular balance update for early next year. So we will get a balance preview of the next upcoming balance patch, the big one, with hopefully big reworks as well, coming next week. So keep that in mind. I will do a video about that, of course, as well. But this patch today is only affecting the Visions of Eternity specs with a few exceptions, and is trying to bring them more in line with existing specs. That means that most of them will get nerfs, but like I said in the beginning, there will be some buffs as well. So let's start with the first one and start talking quickly about the general changes. So Relic of Kastora was really good in World vs. World and PvP on support builds, surprise, surprise, and now reduced the healing by 5%. I think it's still a very, very good relic, but it's definitely a little bit more in line with other healing relics. And then you have ground targeted skills can no longer be cast using the snap ground target to current target option if their targets are off screen or behind an obstacle. That is something what was really annoying in competitive modes, specifically when you fight against someone and they could hit you through walls with very annoying attacks, or just had some really easy time killing you without being endangered themselves. So this is something they had to fix for sure. Let's see if that finally fixes everything, or if that's just, again, not working perfectly. But either way, this hopefully should resolve some issues, especially with, for example, short bone engineer or other really annoying stuff. Now, let's talk about Elementalist. Elementalist gets some really big changes. Fiery Might, so this trait gave 5% damage increase to burning and 5% more strike damage against burning foes, just doesn't do the burning damage increase anymore. So it will be noticeable, and that continues with Evoker. You see it here, condition damage bonus decreased. You reduce condition damage bonus with the focus as well, not only the prowess. Like 2% here, 5% here, 2% for the strike damage as well, and 5% for the strike damage here as well. So already changes to the damage output, but we will get way bigger changes here in a second. Ignite and Conflagration, which are the fire familiar skills, also nerfed for sure, and just more duration decreases and just some interesting functional changes here, so that it now increases the burning duration instead of the number of stacks. So that means that you cannot apply another burning, it will just increase the duration of an already existing stack, which is a weird functional change, but okay, I guess that makes sense for them. And then now Sunspot, which is the trait that gave you Fire Aura when you swap to Fire, or when you use Empowered Familiar skill, has now a 5-second cooldown. That is making sense, yeah, it should have done probably in the beginning. Flame Expulsion also, cooldown, okay, makes sense. And then here the big one, Specialized Elements. So when you lock yourself in an attunement, previously the recharge reduction from the basic skill was 2 seconds and the empowered one 6 seconds. Now it is a percentage of the maximum skill's recharge. So that means that if you have a skill that has a 6-second recharge, they will not get instantly reset with the empowered skill, but they will get a fraction of that only. So 20% of the 6 seconds, that means a little bit more than 1 second of recharge. So that is a heavy nerf for all specialized elements traits users, every single build of them. There is, of course, the argument that some of this might actually be a buff. So as soon as you have a skill that has a cooldown over 30 seconds, the 20% is higher than the 6 second space, for example. However, this is barely the case. There are only a handful of skills on Elementalist that actually have a higher cooldown than that. So yeah, probably not really like anyone getting a buff here. This is a big nerf, especially for fire specialized Evoker. Big nerf for sure. And then of course we also get some nerfs to the power based hair, not as much as the others, but still reduce the power coefficient here and reduce the power coefficient here as well. Keep in mind, the specialized elements trait is for all game modes. However, the power coefficients here and for all the other skills here, they are for PvE only, so they will still deal quite a lot of damage in PvP and World vs. World. Lightning Blitz is also power damage reduced. Again, there are a lot of nerfs to power hair, air Evoker as well, which is, I wouldn't say surprising, but it was never as good as the fire one. And then you have Familiar's Blessing in PvP and World vs. World. Now fire grants might instead of quickness, and air now grants fury instead of quickness. That is a heavy nerf to especially air, because a lot of bursty Evoker with spear, scepter, whatever, used the air here and provided a lot of quickness to themselves and to their allies, and this is now a big nerf in those game modes. So really noticeable. I think that should bring it more in line with other DPS specs to not have quickness on their own, at least not a lot of times. I think Evoker gets some heavy nerfs, was suspected. We will have to see how good it is after that. I don't know the numbers yet, but I think it will definitely be still viable, not as broken anymore. I think all of them will be around like 40 to 45k as a DPS. I would not expect it to be any higher than 45 to 50k. That will be very surprising if that still has crazy numbers here. Next up we have Engineer. Engineer Amalgam, I would say not as surprising as Evoker with the changes, just some flat damage reductions to power coefficients to a lot of the protocols. And yeah, I would say that makes sense. It had a lot of damage there. It's, I would say, not as crazy the nerfs as for Evoker, but also Conduit here, for example, 6 to 3 seconds, the poison duration, that's like 50% nerf, that's quite a lot. So Conduit will definitely get a big damage decrease here. However, we also have some buffs here. Increase the morph damage increase from 10 to 33%, that's definitely not really good. Then we also get here like the cooldown reduction from 2 to 2.5 seconds in PvE for mercurial tendencies. So there are some buffs for Amalgam as well. It's just some things that are hitting very hard before the patch are now not hitting that hard anymore. Still very hard, especially with the damage modifiers, maybe even higher than before. Keep that in mind. And then Eugene's just getting a little bit more might stacks and the duration is higher, as well as some more might increases, so that you actually spam your skills and just provide more passive might if you take this trait, which would be your alacrity option here. And then just some bug fixes. Nothing too crazy, I would say here. And I would say Amalgam, one of the ones that got buffed and nerfed at the same time, so overall probably not too much. Probably somewhat in the similar spot. Next up we have Guardian. Guardian is, I would say, one of the most interesting ones because they just had a bug that the Luminary weapons used an incorrect weapon strength in PvE and World vs. World. What does that mean? It was apparently scaling too much, so that means that you had a 64% damage increase to all forge skills in those game modes. So not in PvP, but in PvE and World vs. World, you had on average 64% more on the forge skills, which is insane. So that means that you will have a heavy nerf to all those skills, especially the power-based builds. So of course healers don't care that much about damage, but for all power-based alacrity DPS, power-based guardians, for Luminary, they will get crazy damage nerfs with this, because your hammer and your staff, symbol, all of that will have less power. Yeah, and that also is even increased with the reduction of the power coefficient, so all your damaging attacks in the forge in PvE, and some of them even in PvP and World vs. World as well. So that will be definitely a heavy hit to Luminary's damage output. I still think Luminary will be a good damage dealer, don't get me wrong, but not as overtuned as it was before, especially if you consider that it was also doing a lot of additional damage that they actually didn't even intend to have. And then we have some really important change to Resolute Stance, almost the healing gutted into half. It's crazy. I think this skill was, in my opinion, the most broken skill in the entire pack of elite specs healing skills. I really think this was insane. Having a 6.5k base heal and you share the Conduit cleanse and all the crazy stuff with your allies on top of that. It's insane. I think that is definitely deserved, but it's still a very good heal. And then you have other things too, for example, Sovereign of Light, powered coefficient reduced. That is also a very important trait that you proc all the time, so that will be noticeable, the damage decrease here. And just reduce the recharge reduction from 4 to 3 seconds in competitive modes for the Illuminating Inspiration, so that you actually cannot spam your skills that often. But I still think Luminary in competitive modes, especially PvP, almost untouched, except for the Resolute Stance chains. So I think Luminary is still viable in all game modes, but not as broken as it was before. And you see that pattern for almost all of them. But Luminary, big nerfs. Then we have Mesmer, Troubadour, get 2 changes. Yeah, 2, you can count that. It's not crazy. I would say I expected some buffs to power Troubadour in PvE, or at least some usefulness and ease of use changes, but they didn't do that, so I guess we have to wait for that a bit more. Tale of the Second Sign, cooldown increase in World vs. World and PvP. Harmonious Harp, increase the cooldown 5 seconds more in PvP and World vs. World. So PvE, Troubadour untouched. I think it was in a good spot. The others were just overperforming, and hopefully now I can finally test some more Troubadour with not feeling bad for not running a Ritualist, because that was just overperforming and Troubadour was always a worse choice in my opinion. So there we go. And in PvP and World vs. World, I think Troubadour was a menace and is still very good as a support, and those changes will not change that, I would say. Next up, we have Necromancer. Like I said, Ritualist, crazy overperforming. A lot of damage nerfs, like across the boards. Lingering Spirit, almost half the damage increase. Just some damage nerfs to a lot of the high damaging skills and power coefficients. Essence Blast, Splinter Weapon, Innervate Anguish, just a lot across the boards in PvE. But some of them also in World vs. World and PvP. For example, Empowering Spirits is now nerfed from quickness to vigor sharing. That is, again, something that you will see, and they will try to make quickness somewhat rare. Not as rare as Alacrity in competitive modes, but still not as easy to share for the new specs. I think that makes sense. It was really, really strong. And also the damage decreases to Anguish Wanderlust is somewhat not surprising. I would say it was heavily dealing damage even on a tanky build. So yeah, makes sense. And then Ritualist Shroud increased the life force drain rate from 3 to 5% in World vs. World only. So that's only World vs. World, not PvP or PvE for that matter. But that will definitely drain your Shroud way faster, so you cannot use your attacks that often, or you, for example, stay in there for the damage reduction. So makes a lot of sense. Good job. I think Ritualist is still extremely strong because of its flexibility, even if the damage might be lower now. Still very, very good spec. I don't even expect it to be like absolutely crazy weak in terms of damage output, but definitely noticeable. Big nerfs here across the board. But we also got a bug fix, of course, here that this now also applies to the affected spirit skills other than the auto attacks, which is quite important, because normally you would always use the quickness trait, and now at least you can use the other trait as well. So I think that is definitely a good change. Hopefully it's also big enough that you will want to take this trait if you want to be DPS and not just say 1% more damage. I would rather take the quickness trait to have 100% quickness. Yeah, I think that is definitely heavily needed. But now let's talk about Ranger, shall we? Ranger, again, I was a bit surprised about this small amount of changes here for Galeshot. Only in PvE, only damage nerfs. I did actually not expect to get big nerfs to Galeshot, but they nerfed across the board a lot of stuff from the Cyclone Bow. And I'm not completely sure here. Aquarius Parry reduced power coefficient from 2 to 2.5 in PvE only. That's an increase for me, but maybe you have an updated version now when you watch this video, but either way, yeah, I think the burst damage was quite good in PvE, but I feel like it had some bugs and some really nasty traits that you could have chosen, but they are not as good, so they could have buffed it, but they didn't. So I have big hopes for the upcoming balance patch, because this one, I have to be honest, I'm a bit disappointed. I really hope that Galeshot will be fixed, so to say, will be a good build that I can now play, but they nerfed the damage output and also like did not compensate it for other things. So I don't know, it's a little bit weird to me. Galeshot was not that much overperforming compared to the others. So yeah, we will have to see how high the impact here is, but I'm a bit surprised here, I have to be honest. Bit surprised. But now let's talk about Revenant, one of the ones with the biggest amount of changes. So Revenant Conduit gets a lot of changes, especially in PvP and World vs. World. You can see here the bottom part starting from here to here this blue part here is only PvP and World vs. World, and you just have across the board nerfs to how this works. So it's just like damage decreases, making your stats especially less valuable, so you just get half the amount of stats from bolstered bonds. That's a very important. And also, like, for example, the energy cost increases, so it's just not as spammable anymore, that you don't deal as much damage anymore. But yeah, in general, you see a lot of changes for PvP and World vs. World. Hopefully that will help to not make everything being played as Conduit. And we also have some changes for PvE. So Conduit gets nerfed, power gets buffed. That's the summary here. So release potential Mesmer gets a bit of a nerf, and release potential Assassin gets a bit of a buff in PvE. Then you just have some nerfs to Hex Eater Vertex, the damage as well. And Twin Moon Sweeps actually gets a power coefficient buff. I think that's quite nice. So you have hopefully an option for power Conduit as well. It's already an option, I know, but it was underperforming. Hopefully it will get now a bit better. And the energy cost reduced, which is also good for the Conduit build to some extent. And then of course we have here release potential Dervish, increase the casting time, makes it a bit easier to dodge or stuff like that. And then enhanced embodiment, increase the recharge reduction from 20 to 30% in World vs. World and PvP. So hopefully that's a bit more useful now. In general, Mistfire is now not dazing them, but just burning them when you use Cosmic Wisdom, which was really annoying. That was a really, really good trade. Now it's a little bit weaker. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. In general, Conduit, I would say power Conduit in competitive modes almost untouched, in PvE buffed, and Conduit across the board nerfed. Yeah, makes sense. It was really, really strong. And I think it will still be a valid pick in all game modes. Then we have Thief, Antiquary. Antiquary gets surprising amount of little changes. I was hoping for some changes how it functions in PvP and World vs. World, but it's like nothing here is really in PvP. It's all about PvE, I would say. Damage decreases across the board. Some burning decreases, and of course here Combat High just gets 3% to 2% only per stack. That is a damage decrease for sure. And then of course that means that you will in total just have way less damage output. I think it's still a very high number, respectable number. I think that might still be one of the higher ones, Antiquary, if I look at the changes here. But we will have to see, because it's always RNG dependent, so might be high roll higher than others, might be low roll and lower than others. I guess that makes sense. And then we have a change that I was always in favor for. Possessive Hoarder now grants, even on the defensive artifacts, Alacrity. That is really important, because it was always like really weird that you had to use the offensive ones, and sometimes you want to use a defensive one because you're after all a support. You know, if you want to support the allies, sometimes you also want to support them with a deflect or something, and you couldn't use it because it didn't provide alacrity. Now at least you can do that, and I think that makes sense. I'm not sure if that will be enough to make some kind of healing Antiquary viable. I think that's a little bit off, but yeah, at least it is now a little bit more flexible in that regard. And lastly, we have Warrior. Warrior, one of the only classes that actually gets core changes, only in World vs. World though, so they will just get some nerfs to how the support functions, and just some cooldown increases for the banner, and just some reducing the duration of some boons. Yeah, makes sense. It was really, really strong. Like across the board, you could play Spellbreaker, you could play Core, you could play even Berserker, and you could of course play Paragon. So I think those changes hit Warrior in World vs. World where it needs to be hit. I'm not sure if that's like the numbers that they should do, but yeah, at least that's hitting the right targets. And then we have Paragon, just increasing a lot of PvE things here so that the power coefficients are better. Hopefully that makes those skills worth using now in our power DPS build, or at least in the Alacrity power DPS build as well. We will have to see, but definitely a good change here. And then they nerfed some World vs. World things again, just so that they are not as good anymore. Makes sense. And it was really, really good. Like across the board, like Chant of Action, Chant of Freedom, they never surrender. Those were really, really good things to have on a Warrior, and to just always take it. And it's still very good, don't get me wrong. It will just get a little bit of nerf. And then they buff Inspiring Implements, which is your minor trait. Now you will also get Adrenaline and Motivation while swapping weapons. That's good. And also get a little bit more Adrenaline when you have no Refrains of active. Yeah, not too crazy change, I would say, but not too bad either. And then of course you have Crisp Pacing. The damage and condition damage increase has been changed from 7.5% to 10%, and on the upper end from 25 to 30%, which means that you have a 5% damage increase in PvE, which brings Power Paragon from 40k I guess more towards 45k. We will have to see how much the On Your Knees and Find Your Weakness impacts it, but in general, I think that's the right direction. I think Power Paragon was a little bit underperforming. Now it should be more in line with the others. And in general, I think Warrior buffs and nerfs across the board makes sense. But overall, I would say this is not the biggest change and biggest patch overall. If you look at all of the changes here, I think the biggest losers are, of course, Evoker and Ritualist and Conduit, I guess. But if you are a PvP player, I think there are not that many crazy changes. If you are a World vs. World player, there are actually quite a few. And in PvE, yeah, I mean, I would say they are just the damage numbers tuned down. I would say if you are playing support in any game mode, they did not change too much there. I think in PvE specifically, the crazy performance of supporting it with the new specs is like barely untouched. And that's crazy. So I would say overall, this patch is more of a, so to say, hotfix patch than it's a real balance patch. Yes, it changes a lot of things from the new specs, but it's more to bring them more in line. And we will have to see if they are still overperforming when we see all the benchmarks and stuff in PvE specifically. But I hope there is now a reason to switch back to older specs other than fun, and not only saying, yeah, I mean, I will decrease my damage, but I still want to play Chronomancer as a quickness DPS build. I really hope this will be the case, but we will have to see. Let me know your comments on this and what you think about those changes, and if you're excited about next week to get to see what the balance team brings up in January. But yeah, I am having high hopes for January balance patch and hopefully some big reworks to some really underused specs. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this summary of this balance patch overview, be sure to leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, upcoming Wintersday and news and all of that good stuff, tier lists of course, be sure to subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.